Welcome back to the podcast. Today's guest is a fascinating example of what's possible later in life. Most men in their 60s are thinking about slowing down, protecting their joints, maybe trying to hold on to fitness they built earlier in life. But today's guest did something very different. He stepped on a bodybuilding stage in his 60s, and not just for fun. He spent nearly a year preparing, training, dieting, and committing the kind of discipline most people struggle to maintain for a month. He also coaches physique transformations in the GoBundance community, guiding men through a 10 or 11-month bulk and cut transformation. But this raises some interesting questions. How do we define fitness? Is the goal to look impressive or to stay capable for decades? What does aging powerfully actually mean? And if a man wants to feel strong, energetic, and capable in his 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, what should he actually be training for? Today, we're diving into all of that. Please welcome Rami Odeh.
Hey, good to see you, brother. I'm
Good to see
excited.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What an
so I wanted
intro.
to kick off that I think, we spent a lot of conversations, you and me, and I mean, in throughout the fitness and biohacking and longevity and all this space, talking about what we don't agree on, and that minutia, the nuances, right, of the probably 5 to 10% that we don't agree on. And, the
Right.
American College of Sports Medicine just released new strength training guidelines for the for the first time in decades. And it basically says, my interpretation, most people should be strength training twice a week, is basically what it says, and
Which,
not
by the
earth
way, they
shattering.
said 40 years ago when I was in graduate school,
That's right.
exact same
That's
thing.
right.
Yeah, but
But they
deep
finally
research.
put it
Yeah.
in writing. So I want to spend the bulk of today talking about the things we do agree on and just, diving into the context or but I think we try to over optimize and over personalize and we miss the forest for the trees sometimes. So let's start wherever you want to start. In the intro talked about your bodybuilding. So do you want to talk about that experience a bit and maybe what you learned through that, and then we can go from there?
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, I appreciate being here. It's always an honor. And I love how you brought that up because that is that's the nuance of our group, right? We love to nitpick the 1% of things that drive us, right? But really we agree on almost everything. And so, just to give some context and background, like I was an endurance athlete for like 35, 40 years, right? And always weight trained. I've been weight training since I was 13. So that would be exactly 50 years that it took me to get on a stage. But I always weight trained more, not so much like to weight train or like to get a result, was more like to make my sport better. Right. So it was to be a stronger runner, I started when I was racing motorcycles. Like I was a skilled motorcycle rider and I would die like 8 minutes into each moto. Right. So I would start with that. And then, so I've always done it, but never really fully committed to it. So I lost track in terms of triathlons. I did over 300 endurance races in my career, including multiple marathons. Then I got into ultra running, did multiple ultra marathons, and then just kind of got burnt out, and always loved the gym, always loved bodybuilding, but never fully committed. So I did it back when I was 59. I said, I'm just going to fully commit to this, completely quit cardio. So I went from like 15 to 20 hours a week of cardio to zero. Basically hired a bodybuilding coach and he's like, look, we've got to completely change where you're at. Your body's so dependent. He's like, we're going to add back cardio. But right now, you're so cardiovascularly fit that it's almost doing nothing in terms of what we wanted, which was the fat burning component. So completely quit, got really into weight training and did a transformation age 59 to 60. And that kind of changed my whole trajectory in terms of career and things like that. Absolutely loved it. You and I know, you know me well enough to know I don't tell anybody to do anything I can't do myself, right? So I did it first. And ironically, at the end, age 60, I weighed exactly the same as I did at age 59, but you've seen the pictures. I'm a completely
Mhm.
different human, right? And then I, kind of waffled, said, man, I'd really love to get on stage. And, quite frankly, I was scared, man. What's the term, misogi? It was a misogi for me, man. I love being on stage, but not so much in like a little shorts and with my shirt off in front of my kids, right? And it's, I also know the comparison to a photo shoot to getting on stage in a competition is like going to run 3 miles versus trying to break 16 minutes in a 5K, right? Like same distance, completely different kind of mentality. So I finally did it last year. It was the same thing I had done at age 59, just at a much higher intensity, right? The dieting was harder, supplementation was better. My training was about the same, right? So I really haven't changed that in about 4 years. And then the prep, the last 20 weeks is just probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I think I shared this with you. Like a lot of people have asked me, like I've done an Ironman, I've done 300 triathlons, I've run multiple 50-mile races, I've run 100 miles, I've biked 130, 140 miles. All that stuff is hard, but not as hard as prepping for bodybuilding because of the mental aspect. That was my biggest surprise takeaway, you know? So, but I got it done. I did it in November of last year, got on stage and didn't embarrass my kids too bad. And a fantastic experience. And to tell you the truth, might be a one and done, brother. Like it was great. I loved it. I think I'll wait. Maybe when I'm 70, I'll try it again. I'll do it every decade. But yeah, it is. If you think like training for a 100-mile mountain bike or an Ironman is like all encompassing, it's nothing compared to bodybuilding mostly because of the dieting. It's powerful. So yeah, so that's kind of a quick context of how I got to where I am and what I did, and now moving on to the next thing, which I'm not sure what that is yet.
Okay. I remember
Yeah,
a few months ago, you said one of your goals for this year was to not have a goal. And
yeah,
that was gonna be kind of a misogi in a in a way because
like
you've
the
always
hardest thing
had
ever.
something you're chasing and that discipline and, kind of just having a plan, right, to follow. I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes the laziest thing is to overwork, right? And so just
yeah.
to just maintain when you don't have something you're chasing. How's that going?
Yeah, so far so good. I kept my coach for 4 months after my show, which I knew I needed. I have a tendency. I'm a black and white personality, so I have a tendency to go all in and then fall off and then get back. Pick a new goal and start training for that. I've done that for 40, 50 years. Like I literally, this is the first time in my life I don't have a photo shoot or a bodybuilding or a race or something, even like a vacation that I want to look great for, right? I just don't have it on my calendar. It's not easy. Like I told you, I knew it was going to be hard, right? But so far I'm holding with it. My physique is about the same. I'm trying to maintain sort of, you lose about 5 to 7 pounds of kind of water weight at the end and kind of slowly put that back and reverse diet and get yourself back healthy. And so I just kind of not ended, but just took a break from my relationship with my coach, and I'm doing it solo now. And we'll see, man. It's an addiction. I already see myself looking at, like, what am I gonna do? Like, you'll laugh, man. I literally went on a bike ride for the first time in 15 years on a road bike on Friday with a bunch of GoPros, and I was laughing with a friend. I said I had a really good 30-mile bike ride. Unfortunately, we went 44 miles. So but in a way, I miss that feeling, right? That suffering, that being in the zone, 3.5 hours without looking at your phone, all that stuff. So yeah, stay tuned, is all I can say. Like, let's see if I can stay away from my addiction. I'm in recovery right now,
There
Michael.
you
I'm in
go.
recovery. Yeah.
There you go. Well, I want to talk about, kind of from slightly different perspectives, I think, but I think there's a lot of complementarity. Our Venn diagram overlaps a lot, but the way we've been focusing on training, the visibility of the clients we're training is a little bit different. And what I emphasize now is capability and capacity. And so for me, that's strength and endurance and mobility primarily, and then supported by well-rounded nutrition with the goal of enhancing all three of those, not specifically building mass exclusively, and then sleep and supplements and recovery and all those kind of things. That's where I mean, most of that is underlying, except your sort of hypertrophy strength bias, I think, is probably the primary difference.
Sure.
And So if we get on the same side of the table, and for someone who's listening who's wondering what it really means to age powerfully, and maybe they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even beyond, I believe, there's it's never too
Yeah,
late, right? What what does it look like to to train, quote unquote, if that's what if that's what we want to call it, but to more so to live. I think it's a lifestyle for you and me. And I mean, as you mentioned, all the way back to your teens and my teens, I was the only soccer player training with the football team back in high school, back in the
yeah,
90s when strength training just wasn't ubiquitous amongst all sports. So we've had a long history of it, but not everyone has, right? And so it's not like get back to when you were an athlete. Not everyone was an athlete. So I just want to kind of break down the pillars of what people should, include in a week or a 2 week period, and maybe talk about the specifics of frequency and intensity and duration, and bring
sure.
out some of the differences in our philosophies, but again, kind of from the same perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, we overlap 95%, right? Like we both agree that strength training is important. I agree that cardiovascular exercise is important, diet is important, supplementation, all of this. The major difference in what I do and what I'm doing for my people is there's a big aesthetic, right? Now, some people can do a general training program like you, right? I mean, you train a little more than general, let's be honest, right? Like you train more
I
than the
don't
normal
well,
guy. But
I don't train. I mean, and I think that I don't, I'm gonna cut you off. I'm gonna
yeah, no, no, no worries.
you put a pin in that, but I don't train nearly as much as people think I do.
Yeah.
And I think depending on who, we're talking to or about, with anything, it's easier to maintain than it is to get started,
Right,
right?
like, think of I just did that 44-mile bike ride. There's no way I could have done that had I not been a triathlete for years.
That's
There's
right.
still muscle memory and all that,
That's
right?
right. And but
And
yesterday
yeah.
I was just telling my Heather, your wife is also Heather,
Yeah, yeah.
that for context for the
Yeah, when you
audience,
say
but
Heather, I'm like, "Wait, you're talking to my
yeah,
wife
exactly.
again? What are you doing, Michael?"
Yeah. But I was just telling her over breakfast that yesterday I was doing kind of Olympic weightlifting based workout, and I did a 10-minute EMOM, every minute on the minute, of
Sure,
thrusters, and building up each minute for 5 rounds, and then repeating 10 minutes, right? And then it took a 5 minute kind of get everything together. And then I did a 20-minute Metcon, and I was working for 30 minutes, and I'm like, I'm sore today. I'm feeling
yeah,
it in my core, and I'm in good shape, right? But like it doesn't take a lot if the
sure.
intensity is meeting where you are, and so I wouldn't encourage anyone to do that workout right out of the gate. But
No,
I only need 30 or 40 minutes 3 or 4 times a week to maintain my fitness where it is. And I think the biggest thing is that I'm not very sedentary, right? So
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't spend. I'm standing right now. I have a stand-up desk. I don't spend very much time sitting at all, and I don't have a commute, in the car that I'm sitting for a long time. And so I think sometimes it's the thing. I mean, this is something to dive into. Sometimes it's the things you're not doing that
yeah.
are keeping you in good shape, not the things you're really focused on doing. So, I just want to summarize that I work out less than 4 hours a week,
Right, right. Yeah,
in
no,
the
my point
gym.
wasn't really that. Yeah, no, I get it, and
Yeah,
I know that about you, but I also know you have a base, right? And, you have to build that
that's right.
base.
That's right.
Now, my point was more that my drive and my style of coaching now has a very aesthetic bend to it. But what the aesthetic does is give people that base, right? So I tell guys all the time, hey, what we're going to do for the next 10 or 11 months, you will probably never have to do again for the rest of your life. Like, I'm going to pack on so much muscle and I'm going to teach you so much about dieting that now you'll have this in your toolbox. And I get this from every guy. They're like, oh my gosh, it's so much easier to keep this lean mass that I have now, right? Because, I cannot tell you how many guys I talk to, especially within our community. They're like, I'm in the best shape of my life and I won't take my shirt off at the beach because I feel like shit, right? On how I look. And I was that guy, right? I could run 100 miles, but I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't even like the way I felt because I was overdoing cardio and not doing enough strength. So my point is, I do an aesthetic based physique challenge with people and with myself, but the byproduct or the perk is lifelong fitness and strength and muscle tissue and all the things that we want, and cardiovascular, right? Because we do a lot of that at the end. It's interesting. So there are misconceptions, right? And one of the biggest misconceptions I get with guys is they get on the phone with me. They're like, hey, I want to do your challenge, but I don't think I have the time for it. I'm like, dude, what do you do now? They're like, well, I'm training for an Ironman. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to cut your training by 75%. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, time wise, like I went from training 15 to 20 hours a week to 5, and my physique completely changed for the better, and now I can add stuff back in. So, what I tell people is you can do it a number of different ways, right? You can kind of over a very long period of time, you could train twice a week, right, with weight training, and do 150 minutes of zone 2 cardio, which are the recommendations, right? And you'll be in decent shape, and you will never see a change in the mirror ever. For most guys, my point was getting at, there are genetic freaks that could do that and all of a sudden be like, look at my shoulders, right? Like they exist. They are unicorns. I've been doing this for 35 years. I've worked with thousands of people. I've probably encountered 20 in my life that can get it. Most guys, to really change their body, and I work almost, I keep saying guys, I've worked with a lot of women as well, but I work almost exclusively with men now. Most guys need a big volume of both in the beginning. And then, like you said, it's a build and hold, right? So I tell people, look, we can crush it for a year and then you can kind of cruise, or you can just cruise the rest of your life, but you're not going to see that huge change, right? So, you can, and most guys are like, let's crush it for a year, right? Let's do that. Let's go all in. I'm not a fan of 3 months transformation challenges. I think they're BS. I'm not a fan of 75 hard. I mean, I think it's a great kickoff, but I don't think it ingrain. It's hard for me to ingrain lasting habits, and I have guys for a year. And even then, I still need guys sometimes for another year to really get those habits in there. So, you asked about general. I mean, in general, what I like, once they've gotten to where they need to be, 2 to 3 days of weight training, 150 to 200 minutes of mostly zone 2. And I think your listeners probably know what zone 2 is, but we can dive into that. Zone 2, even some zone 1, like a lot of walking, a lot of movement, a little bit of intervals, right? Depending on the goal. If Michael, you came to me and you're like, hey, I live in Atlanta, I want to break 40 minutes in the Peachtree 10K, totally different program, right? We're doing more intervals. We're doing less weight training. But for most guys, like, I want to look good at the beach. I want my cholesterol, my ApoB to be low. I want my testosterone level to be good. I want to feel good. I want to be able to play with my grandkids, like 2 to 3 days of weight training, that level of there. And then, of course, diving into diet, and we can make that a separate part of the conversation, because I don't think you should meld those two together. They are so different, right?
Yeah.
So that's in general. Now, my program that I give the guys, going from January 1st to October, a lot more weight training, right? And that was the biggest change. Like, I did 2 to 3 days of weight training for probably, of my, how many, 30 years in endurance training, probably 90% of it, I was training 2 to 3 times a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I dropped cardio and went to 5 to 6 days a week of weight training, that's when my body really changed, right? But again, that's not a long-term play, for most people, unless they're competitive bodybuilders. And even a
Yeah.
lot of pro bodybuilders only train 4 times a week now. They just do super intensity. So I think the point you make, and I hear this a lot from CrossFit advocates, they're like, oh, I only trained 7 minutes. And I'm like, your 7 minutes is so, can I curse on am I allowed to curse on here? You want to zap me out?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Your 7 minutes is so fucking hard that 99% of the population would be dead after they do it. You can do that level, right? I mean, I watched you you're in a group of GoBundance, you take my class and you're crushing everybody, right? Your cardiovascular system is up here. So you can take it to that intensity where 30 minutes, I couldn't do that now, right? My zone 5 is beyond lower than yours. So that's why I do a ton of zone 2. So, it's almost like you have to train to be at that point. Does that make sense? You
No,
have to really,
absolutely. And
yeah. Yeah,
that's
you
what
got
I
to
was.
kind of get there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was highlighting. I mean, I've been doing CrossFit off and on for 19 years, and one of the reasons I gravitated towards it was, again, going back 30 years, I was doing cleans and box jumps and pushing the sled and doing all the things with football players. And, in the summer heat in the mid Atlantic,
Yeah.
2 a days and whatnot. And I loved it. I loved that intensity. And so it really spoke to me when I first heard about CrossFit in 2007. And I think, that it's now a dying finally,
It
but
is.
one of the longest running sort of trends, quote
Yep.
unquote, of almost 2 decades. Well, it started in 2003, so 2 decades. And I think the methodology was really solid. It grew and evolved into something that became very egoic and
Yeah.
competition driven versus being founded on solid exercise science and sports science
Agreed. Yeah,
principles.
we could do a whole podcast on that. My whole thing, just to double click on CrossFit, when people ask me about it, I'm like, if you find a CrossFit box with a really smart, caring owner, fantastic, great model. But if you find one with some ego driven, doesn't understand physiology, doesn't understand what my body at 63 can do versus a 28-year-old, you're in for a world of hurt. There's a reason why, orthopedic surgeons said it was the best boon for their business, right?
Yeah.
Now it's pickleball, by the way. So they've switched to pickleball with calf injuries. Uh, and again, great idea. They should have franchised it, not licensed it, because licensing it, they had no control. You just buy a CrossFit license and you just do the WODs. There's no oversight. So anyway,
Yeah.
the
Well, I mean,
point is, great
that was
idea, right?
yeah, that was typical Greg Glassman,
Right.
survival of the fittest, so I
Yeah.
mean, it was kind
Yeah.
of an experiment in business of fitness. But
Yeah.
yeah, you bring up an interesting point with pickleball because I think, and this was something that I would definitely wanted to bring up, that I think for me, again, there's three pillars of fitness, and it's cardio, cardiovascular, cardiopulmonary, which I think it's an outdated term, but I think it's important to include
Yeah.
that the lungs also are included, and it's not just the heart but the lungs, right?
Yeah.
Breathing
Of course. Yeah.
and strength and mobility. And in my experience, and I'm interested in the thousands of clients you've worked with, in addition to your own personal experience, that most people are lacking in two of those three, right? And I think
Yeah.
one of the big reasons that ego is one of the big reasons in CrossFit, probably not so much in pickleball, but it's the mobility aspect that we have tight muscles often, right? And I was just looking over again recently the 10 sort of categories of like what CrossFit kind of identified that they focus on, and like agility and stamina and balance and all these kinds of things, which completely gets overlooked. I mean, that's like 20 years ago, early CrossFit
Yeah.
journal kind of things. And it really became, well, how can you maximize, when the CrossFit Open just ended, how can you maximize your skill and proficiency in these like 12 12 exercises? It lost the
Yeah.
diversity. But I think for fitness is, as I said, survival of the fittest. Fitness for me is well-rounded, that you can go out and do the things you love to do, whether it's go for a bike ride off the couch, basically. I mean, you're not spending a lot of time on the couch, right? Because you're training 4 or 5 times a week and meeting, the things we're talking about, but you don't have to specifically train. And I'm not saying you're going to go out and run an Ironman or,
Yeah.
a marathon or something like that, but a 10K, 5K easily, definitely,
Well,
go out and play
not to
pickleball for a
interrupt you,
couple
but
hours.
just to give an example, that bike ride on Friday, my wife's like, "You're an idiot. You haven't been on a road bike in 15 years, and you're going to go out and ride 44 miles." And I said, "Well, first of all, I know we're not racing, like whatever." And I'm like, "Let's see what happens." I said, "If I feel like crap, I'll turn around." It was an out and back, right? And the fact that I could go out and do it, and again, first 30 miles, dude, I felt great. And there was a couple of triathletes on the ride, and I kind of hung on their wheel for 5 to 7 miles, kind of got in that suffer place just to see what it would feel like. And I did it. And so that was a really, really cool thing to know that, and even if I think back on, that off the couch feeling, like my rule of thumb when I was an endurance athlete was I want to be the guy who trained the absolute least and got to the starting line and did well. I never wanted to be the guy who said, I train 140 miles a week running, right? I never wanted that. I wanted to be able to say, hey, I lift weights 3 times a week. I do a couple of runs during the week, and then I do a really long run on the weekends, right? And I was able to be fairly competitive doing that, right? Because I wanted to spend time with my family and I didn't want to be away and all that. So I love that idea. I love it. Now, I'm not going to go out and win any, Cat 2 bike race right now, right? I would be dropped in the first 3 seconds, but I could go out and you and I could go out and have a pretty decent mountain bike ride together. It'd be slow for you, but I could do it, right? I can go out for 3 or 4 hours with you. We did it. I mean, the fact that I can go out for a 4-hour hike, like all that kind of stuff, important to me. At 63, I can look better than 99.9% of the men when they take their shirt off at the beach. That is important to me. It's important to my wife. I like my kids to look at me like a superhero. It's something. And I think not all of them, but almost all guys like that. You know,
So let's
you
double
get,
click on that. So why? I mean,
yeah,
we're now getting into the edge of where we sometimes disagree, because
yeah,
I think if I'm beginning to work with about 10 local Colorado Good Abundance members, doing actually a kind of 12-week jump start
hmm,
to fitness, and guys who each of them, when I put it out there, said, the timing is just really really great. I've wanted to focus on my health and fitness more, and so this is really good.
good,
And I guarantee that the majority of those guys, I can't, if it depends on their commitment to it, I'm committed to them. It depends on their commitment to
right,
themselves. Each of them is going to look better after just 3 months than they do now, even
sure,
though we're not focused on aesthetics as a primary outcome,
absolutely,
right? And so I believe you can have it all. And I think what happens often is, I mean, admittedly, you over indexed on cardio when you were doing the ultra marathons and triathlons and these kinds of things. Right. And I think that's one of the reasons, as I said, most people are kind of out of balance of at least one and sometimes two out of three from a mobility, conditioning, and
sure,
strength standpoint. And I think it's because we tend towards the things we like to do and not the
hmm,
things we need to do,
right,
and that's one of the
of
benefits of
course,
working with a coach, that they look from an outside perspective and say, yeah, you're strong, but your cardio is shit and you're really stiff, or vice versa. I mean, take a yogi who is super flexible but doesn't have the cardio or the strength, right? So do you agree that you can have it all, or are there limitations to that?
yeah. It depends on what it all is. So, it's the level, right? So I think if your goal is, I'd like to be able to just run a 10K with my 10-year-old son this weekend and not have to stop and walk or be dying, right? And I also want to look decent at the beach and I also want to have good blood work and all that. Absolutely. If you want to look like I did at age 60, no fucking way. No way. Unless you're some weird genetic freak like our friend Adrian in the tribe, right? And he trains like crazy anyway. So, but somebody who just can walk around with 6-pack abs all year round, without ever having to like diet or anything, right? So if you come to me and say, hey, I'm 45 years old and I've never seen my abs, you're not going to get it in a 12-week program with 2 days of weight training a week. Not for 99% population. That's my point. So I agree with you that you can be a well-rounded athlete and be able to do everything. And what's cool is like doubling back to what we just said. Now I'm there, dude. Like I can go do a 44-mile bike ride. I can go play pickleball for 3 hours. I did snowmobiling for 2 hours and had no problem with it. I skied for 5 hours a day with zero ski training. Of course,
Mhm.
I'm training, right? I train my legs. I have cardio, all that. But I went out. Now, I didn't keep up with Tim Rhodes skiing, right? He's a badass, right? But I definitely held my own with the guys over 50. So, and I could take my shirt off at the beach and feel and look great for
Yeah.
right? And so, but I had to, here I think is the point. Given my history, to get to this point, I had to go out of balance. I had to go heavily into strength training and diet and supplementation for like a year or two. And now I can cruise. I mean, I'm wearing the alloy stuff. This is our model in our business. It is a kill yourself for a year and then cruise for the next 9 years. right? But if you don't do that first thing, you're spinning your wheels for 10 years.
Yeah,
Make sense?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the visual since we're both endurance athletes. It's like when you're on a long bike ride or you're on a run, right? And you look ahead and you realize that person in front of me is running at exactly the same pace. They're just, 100 meters ahead, right? And
Yeah.
so you just bridge that gap, you close that gap,
There you
and then
go.
you're
But
running
you could
right with
never
them.
hold that bridge. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
It's called surging. It's called
Yeah,
surging and running, right?
exactly, and
And
then once you're there, you just maintain the same pace, right? Like, but you just
yeah,
have to get there. You have to, yeah, you have to have that surge into. So you're talking about surging and overall fitness, and then you just maintain that same thing. It doesn't take
it's a
any
great
more work to
analogy.
maintain. You just have to do that initial leap to get there.
It's a fantastic analogy. And like I was talking to a buddy of mine who was doing the same bodybuilding show I was doing, and I know him really well. He's a gym owner and he does 3 shows a year and he's my age. Yeah, he's like 58. I'm like, how do you do it, dude? He goes, I never let myself get out of shape. He goes, so for me to prep for a show takes 4 weeks. It took me a year. Right. But if you told me right now, Rami, you need to get on stage in 3 months, I could absolutely do it. I could probably do it in a month. Right. I could go from where I am now. A month would suck. Right. But same thing. Right. So, cause I'm so much closer because I've put in all that time.
Yeah,
So, and again, you make a really good point. It's really hard to use an N of one with this because I'm such a weird outlier, right? Who does 25 hours of cardio and then stops completely? It's like who diets for 20 weeks and then eats a whole pizza? Like that's me, right? That's my personality. And that is definitely somewhere like you're much more even keel with it than I am. And I'm much more, almost like it's black and white. That's the addictive side. That's what I'm trying to work on right now at 63, by the way, is
there you
trying
go.
to,
There you go.
trying to balance that. My wife is super happy, that I don't. But my friend of mine called me, he's a really good friend. He's also a business mentor. He said, you to me, brother, are a heat seeking missile. You have to have something to shoot for at all times. And that can be great. And as you know, can be very detrimental because if I don't have a goal, look out. If you're a friend or my wife or one of my businesses, right? I'm going to look for something to work on. And I'm really, really trying to work on that. So,
Yeah,
so far I've made it 4 months, man. So I haven't killed anybody yet,
nice.
but yeah, dude, I think we totally agree. And I think I'm so glad we're having this conversation, even if it wasn't a podcast, because we bump up against that. But remember, I'm working with 25 guys out of 1,000 per year. This is a small group of men that all their life have wanted to see their abs. It's just a thing.
Yeah,
And you've probably been able to see your abs your whole life. So
that's right.
you could
Yeah,
never put yourself in their mentality, right? By the way, I was that guy. I was lean everywhere except my midsection, right? And I was like, this is crazy. I had veins in my legs. I'm covered in vascular everywhere, but I still have belly fat. And it's like, it drove me crazy. So I understand that mentality and I resonate with it and I think it and I applaud it. And whether or not 90% of them, they don't keep them, dude, look at these guys now. Like I was just talking to a guy who started with me in January of 2024 and he's like, oh, I've kind of fallen off on a little. I said, let's pull up your picture from January of 2024. He's like, oh my God. And I'm like, yeah, gap in the game, man. You might not be how you looked on stage in October, but you're a different human and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
yeah,
So let's talk to the other 98%.
yeah,
And we already said it doesn't take as much time as you think, right? So that
mm-mm.
excuse is kind of out.
Throw that
What
out the window.
should
Yeah.
they be doing to close that gap? To get
So
from basically, let's say, doing nothing. I mean, I think just quickly, I want to make sure we cover
right
that
off the couch.
where
Yeah,
you right. When we're not talking
yeah,
about just in the gym, because I think one of the major
yeah.
things, you kick off with blood work with your programs. I think, stress is off the charts. Was just reviewing my blood work with the team that's doing it for the Go Abundance group,
Hmm.
and they said, wow, this is the first like good looking blood work we've seen in months, and
It's
and the
incredible how
person
bad they
right
are.
right before me was taking 20 supplements, and I
Yeah.
think we sometimes are like, how are you optimizing? And we miss the question, what are you optimizing for? You know,
Yeah.
and just skip right over that and like, oh, Rami, what do you take? I want to take, you know, everything. I like your results.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, let's start from, you know, someone who's motivated, they're inspired, and they just need a plan. What do they do to get started?
Yeah. So look, and I'm a big believer in accountability. So let's start there, right? Like you've got to have some form of accountability, even if it's to your chat GPT girlfriend, like whatever it is, right? So an app, a group, a friend, a coach, a CrossFit classes, yoga classes, Pilates, somewhere where you have to report, check in. And if you don't, there's accountability. And that to me is there. And I also start everybody with why you doing this. You just said it. What is the goal? What's the why? Is it that you just had a heart attack? Wow, there's a why. You just got divorced. You're getting married. Your dad just died of a heart attack at 52, right? Like these are powerful, powerful things. You need to figure out what that is, and you need to really identify and hold on to that, because you can't use January 1st as the reason to get fit, which is what everybody in America does, right? Do you know how long the average New Year's resolution lasts now? Did you see the
It's like a
stat from this
week.
year?
It's like a week or
14 days. It's
yeah.
2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 14 days. And so, like, obviously, that's not the way to do it, right? So having a why and having accountability is my number one. So it's funny because that drives people crazy, because they want, the minute they get on the phone with me, they want a list of what they need to go home and do. And I stop them and I say, unless I know why you're doing this, I'm not giving you the how. By the way, the how is everywhere. We've never had more knowledge. I mean, dude, like my chat GPT gave me better analysis of my MRI of my low back than my orthopedic surgeon did, in my opinion. It was unbelievable, and checks in with me every week. How's your back? Are you doing your PT? My wife thinks I'm having an affair. I have to name it, it's like a different name. But so we've got the how, man. Like you and I can give people the how. What we really give is accountability. And then, figuring out, what is your goal, right? Like, what do you want to do? Do you want to run a marathon? Do you want to just feel better? Did you come up with, a high A1C and you have diabetes in your family? Like, what's the goal? And I think, you make a really good point. And we're in a weird group, right? I love our group. I love our tribe. I can't tell you how many guys will spend $40,000 on the latest red light therapy and cold plunge, and they eat McDonald's and they're not lifting weights. Like, I'm like, what are you doing? Like that stuff is such a small percentage. It's amazing. All that stuff, all that longevity stuff is amazing, but pillars and foundation, right? So I start people there, right? That's what I would start anybody with, no matter what their goal is what's your accountability? What's your why? And I push back on people when they tell me a why it doesn't have power. Like, I love it. I stole it from Gary Keller and Keller Williams. If it doesn't make you cry, it's not a big enough why, right? It's got to have an emotional component, and it's got to be yours.
What do
Not
you
my wife
find
told
what do
me
you
to be
find
here.
are the what do you find are the best whys? Like
So yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
from a business perspective or a coaching perspective, we sell pain points, right?
Yeah.
Versus, you know, moving away from something versus moving towards something.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that applies to whys as well, right? I don't want to be in
It really
pain versus I
depends.
want this instead.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I have two groups of humans that I work with now. And it's mostly, I have what I call the general population, and then I have our tribe, which are very high performing, high driven men. Our guys, myself included, hate to lose more than we like to win. So pain points are more powerful for them than pleasure points. Like everything a human does is towards pleasure or away from pain, everything in
Exactly.
some way, right? And so I find pain points with our guys. With the general pop, it's usually going towards some type of pleasure, like a look or a feel, or, a reward or something like that, right? Or, kudos from a family member or something. So it really depends on the population you're working with. But I know, like for me personally, my why is just, you right now, Michael, say to me, I don't think you could run a marathon in a year because you're too much of a bodybuilder. What do you think I'm going to fucking do? I'm going to run a marathon. And then you're going to tell me you can't break 4 hours, and I'm going to go 3:59:59. Tell me I can't do something. And that's an incredible why for me. Right. But like, I tell people, so I use my why as an example because people, they can't wrap their head around it. When you ask someone for a why, they immediately give you a goal. I said, what's your reason for doing this? I want to lose 10 pounds. That's not a why. That's a goal. Why do you want to lose 10 pounds? Because I think I'll look better. Well, why does that matter? Because looking better is a good thing. Like you really have to peel that onion with some people, right? And all of a sudden they go, because when I was a kid, I was made fun of because when I took my shirt off at the pool, everybody said I was fat. Boom. All of a sudden we've got this emotional, deep ingrained thing that I can't change, but I can help them with, right? So for me, you know, my goal is to make myself and my family proud. Well, that's a goal, right? My why is I can remember viscerally, and I get emotional every time I say this, watching my parents when they did something great, how proud I was, but more importantly, watching something that was what I use the term icky, right? Something that was not good and how unbelievably like bad that made me feel as a kid. And I never want my kids to feel that. I see my daughter's friends whose dads have like the worst dad bods and they make a joke out of it, oh, it's my dad who's got a dad bod. They hate it. They hate it, right? And then I hear my daughter, she's like, Dad, I show your picture to all my friends, like, this is my 63-year-old dad. And oh my gosh, like that, I'm emotional right now. That's a why for me. That might not be a why for everybody, you know? So I think it's super individual. So that's really, really, Michael, as you know, as a coach, and I've told this story so many times. I had a police officer. He was the biggest guy I ever coached. He was 416 pounds. Imagine? And he wore a 60-pound kid at work. So he was 476 on the job. And I couldn't find that fucking guy's why. Like, I'm like, what about taking your shirt off in the locker room with all these macho police officers? Yeah, I don't care. He really didn't, right? His blood work was phenomenal. Like as good, I know some genetic, perfect cholesterol, A1C, fantastic, right? Kept trying. Finally, he goes to Disney World and they kicked him off the roller coaster because he was too big to get on with his 10-year-old son. And he started bawling on the phone with me. A year later, he had lost 100 pounds with me. And I kept reminding him of that. We are getting you back to Disney World. You're getting on that roller coaster. Who knew that this macho cop, that would be his why? Right? But he disappointed his son and it was embarrassed in front of his 10-year-old son. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question
Yeah.
because the rest of it would be a whole other podcast for you and me, the how, right? We know the general, lift weights 2 to 3 times a week, zone 2 cardio, a little bit of zone 5, eat I would say a high protein diet according to America, but a moderate protein, moderate carbohydrate, low to medium fat diet, and allow yourself some leeway with that diet, right? One of the biggest advices I can give people is don't look at like going out to dinner as failing on your diet. That's part of your diet. If you look at it as part of it, and it's actually important, right? One of the things I do when I'm cutting weight with people is I give them 1 or 2 refeed days a week. Because if you don't do that, everything stops. Metabolism stops, everything. Plus, psychologically, if I told you, hey, Michael, I can get you the body you want, but for 20 weeks, you can't have one cheat moment. No way.
Yeah.
Unless you're some freakazoid. So,
Well, I
we
was just
know the
having
how.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just having a conversation with a guy who's gonna join me in this program, and he was saying, I don't know if I'm, the timing's right or whatever. I'm, taking a trip a week here and then 2 weeks
Hmm.
later next month.
It's
And
all
I
part of
I
it.
said, that's exactly what my coaching is all about. Like,
Yep.
that's life. Like, if your
Yeah.
program only works when you can do it on the exact days and no cheat meals, and, like, that's a fragile program. That's not
No,
that's not an
that's
adaptable
probably
program.
the biggest shock that people get when they join my program is that for the first 6 months, I do flexible dieting, right? So I'm going to tell you your calories and your macros, but you can have pizza if you can fit it in. You can have a dessert. You can even have alcohol. Now we get super serious for the last 14 weeks. And part of that is psychological. I want everybody to know what that feels like to really commit to like a bodybuilding style cut. But again, they may never have to do it again. And they're getting on stage and taking their shirts off in front of 300 guys. So I got the why nailed with these guys, right? But yeah, and so same, right? Like I use the example all the time when guys tell me that. I'm like, hey, you think other GoPros in our group don't travel? They all travel all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to work around that.
Exactly.
So same as myself, I travel all the time. Just make sure you can find a gym, and even if you can't, take your bands, put them in there, and I'll program a workout you can do in your hotel room.
Exactly.
So there
So I
never should
wanted
be an excuse. Yeah.
one thing that motivates people is standards. Right? Like back in when we weren't in high school at the same time, but back when we were in school, there were the presidential standards of
Yeah.
like push-ups and sit and reach and these kinds of things. Not necessarily the best test, but it provides some kind of standard that a lot of kids these days probably couldn't pass.
Right.
And
Oh
I
yeah.
think, having sort of a I always talk about what's normal versus what's natural. And, w- we have normalized being unfit, being overweight, these kinds of things, when we look at the overall population. And, I've seen standards on a variety of fitness, Instagram, reels and things that say like men in their 40s should be able to run like 1 mile in under 8 minutes. And I'm like, that seems like a low standard. Most
Yeah.
people can't meet it, right? But it's still, that's a low standard, for
Yeah.
1 mile, or like do 5 pull-ups or something like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just thinking again, someone maybe they're, let's say, 35 to 65. That's a large range,
Hmm.
but within or typical of the tribe we're in, what should they be physically capable of doing, regardless of how they look? You know what I mean? As you said, there's outliers like
Yeah.
your 400 plus pound man who has great
Yeah.
blood work, right? He probably couldn't
Right.
do a lot of
Crazy.
pull-ups, but
Yep.
what is the baseline standard that, from a capability, right, a capacity standpoint, let's use my terminology that I really emphasize, that you should
Yeah.
be able to do. And, not aspirational, not, run a marathon, right? But
Yeah.
just sort of baseline, consistently, always ready to do.
Yeah, interesting because this is another shocker that and where my career has gone. Now, if you'd asked me this 5 years ago, I had cutoffs. I had, certain amount you should be able to squat, certain amount you should be able to deadlift, certain amount you should be able to bench press, how far you could run in 12 minutes. I had all that. I don't do any of that anymore, Michael. And it's interesting because what I do is not powerlifting. It's not strength. It's volume and hypertrophy, right? So for me, my standards are it's more like general, being able to hit 5 weight training workouts a week, right? Being able to hit their calories and their macros, 80% of the time, right? Like if you can do that 80% and then 20%, you're having fun, you're crushing it compared to where you were before. So mine are much more general. I have tons of we have boards of those in our gyms, right? Like this is what you should be able to, how long you should be able to dead hang. Kind of like, I know we don't say his name anymore, but the guy who used to be called Peter Attia, right? So I'm still quoting him. I don't give a shit. He still had good research, but so how long you should dead hang, what you can farmer walk with, all that kind of stuff. I leave that to the others because my play is a volume play. Right. So that's one of the biggest things. Guys are like, oh, are we shooting for a 1 rep match? 1 rep max bench? What should we squat? Deadlift? I'm like, I don't care. I just want you fatiguing your muscles and hitting all the reps and the sets that I do. So that's not my world anymore. Right. It's not, I don't have kind of that's a question that you could probably answer a lot more than I could. Like what is a general standard for people? Because I just don't do it. Not in my physique training, you know.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I
When I
do,
was
well,
doing ultra marathon training, yeah, for sure.
I mean, I will touch on that briefly, that I think when we're talking about especially continuing to do the things you love to do, like you mentioned someone in their 60s who's skiing,
Yeah,
100 days a year, that requires balance. It requires coordination. It requires reaction time, these kinds of things. And
yeah,
so I see a lot of people when I go to the gym, and, more of a sort of big box gym, not a CrossFit gym. And I see so many people ignoring the compound lifts and just doing, accessory lifts. I have no problem with hip thrusts and bicep curls and these kinds of things. But if you're only doing single joint movements or these
right.
accessory movements, and you're not squatting and you're not deadlifting and you're not doing these, pressing and pulling and hinging and squatting and these kinds of things. And the beauty of that that I think gets overlooked is, and this is not coming from a CrossFit perspective. I mean, we could have talked about this back in the '70s, and I think there would have been maybe a lot more agreement around it. That it trains at the same time mobility, right? And if you're
Yeah, of
just doing
course.
leg extensions and machines, and there's every year there's new machines coming out, and they're just regurgitating the same movements.
Of
Hammer
course.
strength was a big thing back in the '90s, and then it was something else,
Yeah.
and then it was something else. But you're training that mobility aspect when you're doing the strength training. If you're doing those big compound movements, and then add some kind of cardio, and you've hit all three, versus just doing the isolation movements, which I see a lot of people doing. That's no
Yeah.
no knock to bodybuilding workouts and these kinds of things, but if you're
No,
training
but
for
we do
overall
both.
fitness, you have to do that.
Yeah, and all my guys do both, right? So we do squats, we do deadlifts, we do, leg presses, we do, I don't do a whole lot of Olympic, and the reason I don't do that is because I'm not coaching them in person, and I think those are
Sure.
so intricate and so high chance for injury. I don't do cleans and jerks and things like that, but I'll do, tons of stuff. And then we do substitutions. Like, I've destroyed my lower back. I raced motorcycles for 15 years, right? So regular free weight squats, my legs are super strong. My lower back just can't handle it. But, praise God, my gym finally got a belt squat machine, right? I'm so happy because I can squat heavy now and my back is barely involved in the movement. So there are ways to get those compound movements. That is where I love machines, right? Like that thing's a godsend for me because I love the squat movement. I miss it so much, but my legs can probably squat 315 and my lower back can squat 135.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
different parts of my body, right?
Yeah.
And I just have to work around it. So yeah,
Well,
no, I agree.
barring injury, because that, I mean, if you're experiencing an injury, or the holdover from an injury, right, then you should seek medical
Yeah,
assistance in some way, right? You should get evaluated. But barring that, I've worked with a lot of people who initially say, well, I don't squat or I don't deadlift because it hurts my back, right? And I like to reframe that it might be revealing something, right? That you're working around the problem versus working through it. And a lot of times
sure.
when we do it in a smart way, we're able to start squatting again and start deadlifting again. And those are movements that they're truly functional movements that we
Oh,
do
they're
in
great.
everyday life,
They're
right?
great. Yeah.
So we can't work around them in our 30s and expect to bend down and pick something up, a heavy package in our 60s in a healthy way, right? So do you subscribe to that a lot of
Yeah.
times it's you
Well,
we
100%.
gotta address a
Yeah,
problem,
yeah.
the root
Yeah, if
cause.
you saw my MRI, you'd be like, "Wow, I can't believe you're walking around." So it's not like I'm squatting 315, right? But, and I'm not making an excuse, it just is what it is. And
Sure.
so, but yeah, I hear that in guys like 35, squatting's bad for you. I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like squatting's one of the best things you can do, and deadlifting is one of the best things when it's done right. Problem is a lot of people don't know how to do it right. And this goes way back to the beginning of what you said. What would you do with someone? It's some type of coaching, some type of accountability. I have clients send me videos of them doing things when they tell me it bothers their lumbar area. And typically it's because they're just not engaging their core or they're not working enough core or whatever. So yeah, I agree. I mean, like you said in the beginning, I think you and I agree on 98% of everything, and can't agree on everything. It wouldn't be any fun.
That's right.
So
That's right. Well, let's wrap up today, talking about something we both might disagree on. We agree on it, but we disagree with the movement of biohacking, longevity, quick fixes.
mhm.
Which I just think is there's it's missing. It's the garnish. It's the appetizer, right? It's not the main course. And
Yeah,
it seems, unfortunately, that has taken over as a cultural wave, that the majority of people, who come to me are, all bought in, and basing their health around their sauna usage, and
and they're
and
cold
cold
plunge
plunging and these
and they're
kinds of,
red light.
and then, yeah,
Yeah.
and they're not really doing the core things. And so, what would you emphasize to someone who is kind of coming from that perspective and saying, I'm doing all the things right, but they're not getting the results that and it's obvious to
Yeah.
us why, right? But
Yeah, I
not to
have
them.
them just outline their training week, right, and their diet, like, literally those and their sleep. I look at those 3 big movers, and all 3 of them are fucked all the time. right? You know, I had one guy who was cold plunging an hour a day, dude, an hour. Like, so he was such a wreck, right? He wasn't lifting weights, but I'm cold plunging for an hour. And I'm like, are you nuts? Like, anyway. So yeah, I just have him outline that. I'm like, look, this is the foundation of your house. Your cardio, your weight training, your diet, and your sleep, right? And by the way, your stress, that's all affected by those four things, right? A lot of our stress comes from the fact that we're not sleeping. People are like, "What? You're 63 and you sleep through the whole night? You don't get up and pee?" I'm like, "No, dude, I don't." Right? Like, it's possible. Just do the right things. Don't drink a gallon of water before you go to bed. Take care of your health. You know. So I that's what I lean on, right? And I know we agree 1,000% on that. Like, I push back so much on the biohackers in our group, like, because that's all they're pushing, right? What they should say is do all the other things, but like, I'm a big proponent of hormone therapy when needed. But I always say do everything else first. Don't take testosterone and sit on the couch and go, why aren't I jacked? Like, I don't get it, right? Do everything else first and then check your blood work, check your symptoms. If you're off, it's a great, safe way to take you to the next level, right? Or if you've lost, it's the same thing with depression, anxiety, everything. Like, do everything first. See what you can do. And then this stuff is fantastic. By the way, I love sauna. I do it every day. I also like yoga, but I'm not going to do yoga. I always tell people yoga is great. Don't do it in replacement of one of your weight training days. Do it in addition. Pilates is great. In addition, sauna is fantastic. In addition, right? It's an add-on. It's not like they're like, but I sauna 6 times a week. Why aren't I jacked? Why can't I run a 10K? I'm like, oh my gosh. I read somewhere that sauna is as good as zone 2 cardio. And I'm like, well, yeah, interesting stuff. So yeah. So we agree 100% on that, dude.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
funny
And
in a
it's
sauna,
very frustrating. It's very
just,
frustrating.
just because you're
Yeah.
sweating and your heart rate is up a little bit
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's exercise.
No, no, I know it's hilarious. If that was the case, then watching a good movie would be just as good, right?
That's
Like,
right.
or something exciting.
That's right.
But yeah, no, I think hopefully what we're getting across in this is like, just, with all the knowledge we have, it still comes back to, you talk about like good coaches, right? Like in football, what are they known for? The fundamentals and repeating the fundamentals. We are chief repeating officers. CRO is our job as coaches, right? How often do you have to say the same thing over and over? But that is because all the noise and all this stuff out there. And in my career, I've been doing this since 1992. So you do the math, right? Nothing has changed in terms of, the delivery and the AI and all that might be different, but you still got to lift heavy weights. You still got to get your heart rate up. If you want to lose weight, you have to eat in a deficit. Sorry, fasting people, but you still have to eat in a deficit, right? You want to add muscle, you can add some at a maintenance, but probably need a little surplus. Like, these things haven't changed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I like to emphasize, just close with this, that I like to emphasize that even the top athletes, when you see their highlight reel, and the exceptional moments, but the majority
yeah,
of the time, they're just doing the basics, they're doing the fundamentals
boring,
exceptionally well.
boring.
They're just putting
Yeah,
in the reps, they're getting the 10,000 hours, and that's what mastery is. It's not figuring out the next, best thing. Just do the things that have worked for
yeah.
everyone else for the last
Who
100 years.
who's the best free throw guy in basketball? And they say, "Why is he so good? What's his skill set?" He throws more free throws than anybody else in practice.
That's right.
That's it. Like, unfortunately, that's it. For a lot of sports, that's what it's about, man, and everything in life. So yeah,
That's right.
again, good stuff, man. Good
Yeah.
stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
for people who wanna reach out or find you
Yeah.
on the interweb, what's the best way to,
Yeah, everything's under Coach Rami. So
okay.
one word, Coach Rami, Rami. You can go to my website, Facebook, my Facebook page, Instagram, all that stuff, and reach out. And I always offer a free coaching session for anybody who wants to get jacked in 10 minutes a week. Totally kidding. So yeah, sorry, if you work with me, you're actually gonna work. So, but yeah, you're gonna feel good and look good. So I appreciate you, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Rami.
Yeah. Awesome. Have a good one.
You too.